This is the Making the Tough Call podcast. My name is Catherine Crace. I'm a social worker, lawyer, and longtime trainer in professional ethics. Please note that while I am an attorney licensed to practice law in New York State for over 20 years, I'm not your attorney. So nothing I say in my recordings should be considered legal advice. Today, we're going to talk about the boundary challenges for mental health supervisors. Professionals take on particular roles in the capacity of their work. Mental health professionals, for instance, might serve in roles as therapist, counselor, advisor, advocate, and coach, amongst others. But when a mental health professional serves as a supervisor, their role might also include mentor, authoritarian, and others. The definition and expectation of each role provides a boundary for that role. When the multiple roles of a professional overlap or challenge each other, we call these boundary concerns. Boundary concerns for supervisors are particularly challenging because of the power dynamics involved. Supervisors have considerable power over their supervisees. When there are boundary concerns, the professional needs to carefully consider the implications and make a decision that appropriately prioritizes certain roles. One of the challenges to boundaries when you're a supervisor is what we refer to as dual or multiple relationships. When a supervisor has a relationship with their supervisee outside the context of professional services that they're providing, we call that a dual relationship or a multiple relationship. For instance, a supervisor might have children who go to the same school as their supervisee or live in the same neighborhood as their supervisee. Most commonly, supervisors and supervisees might have a friendship outside of work. This is a dual or multiple relationship. Dual and multiple relationships with supervisees are actually very common, but they do always come with ethical risks related to boundaries. When a professional has a dual relationship with a supervisee, there's a chance that that relationship outside of the supervisee-supervisor role will impact the supervisor's response to their professional duty. The risk largely comes from the power the supervisor has over the supervisee. Those feelings that a supervisor might have related to that additional role with the supervisee are not focused on the goals of the supervisory relationship. As a result, the thoughts and feelings associated with the non-supervisor role might influence the decisions that the professional makes in their supervisor role. The supervisor might provide more attention to a supervisee that they have a dual relationship with. And that difference in attention might be more attention than they provide to their other supervisees. And that's not fair to the supervisees who don't have a dual relationship with that supervisor. The supervisor might miss important factors in their evaluation and support of a supervisee that they have a dual relationship with, because they might make assumptions about what that supervisee knows or needs to know. This also isn't fair to the supervisee in the dual relationship with the supervisor. The supervisee in a dual relationship with their supervisor might not be as willing to share compromising details that are necessary for their supervisor to provide them with the best level of support, because they're concerned that this information might change the way their supervisor thinks about them personally. This limitation in particular puts the supervisee and supervisor at a great risk from the dual relationship. So, for these reasons and many more, supervisors should be careful and deliberate when entering into dual relationships with supervisees. This is especially true about romantic and sexual relationships between supervisors and supervisees. Supervisors who have romantic or sexual relationships with supervisees are risking legal and ethical liability. Concerns for exploitation of the supervisee are paramount. While there is rarely an express prohibition against these relationships at a particular job, there is inherent concern for lack of autonomy for the supervisee, even if they consent to having that relationship with their supervisor. The supervisor is the one who takes on great risk when entering into such a relationship. Dual relationships of all different kinds are usually not explicitly prohibited, but there are certain roles, settings, and locations where such dual relationships are more likely to occur. No matter their frequency, dual relationships between supervisors and supervisees should always be ethically evaluated to insulate both the supervisor and the supervisee from the risks of that relationship. So let's look at some case examples, and let's look at the 4 ethical principles: beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice that I previously discussed in some blogs you can check out on my website. And we can use these 4 principles to help us make a determination of the best course of action in these cases. For instance, talking about private or personal matters at work. It's very common for coworkers to talk about personal and private matters when they're with each other at work. For instance, coworkers share vacation plans or pictures when you return. You might confide in a coworker when you're experiencing a challenging family situation, or share the excitement of a special achievement like a child's graduation. But when your coworker is your equal, the risks of this connection are minimal. When there's a power imbalance, there are more considerable risks. As a supervisor, you should be able to explain how these communications with your supervisees are ethically appropriate. When a supervisor tells a supervisee about their vacation plans, whose benefit is this communication for? It might bring the supervisor joy and thus a benefit to them, but what about the supervisee? Is this communication happening during their supervision time? If so, they're actually being harmed by not focusing that time on them, which triggers concerns for what we call non-maleficence. In that moment, does the supervisee actually have a choice to say, I really don't care, I'm not interested in hearing this? Not really. And so their autonomy is limited. And when it comes to justice, supervisors should be very thoughtful about perpetuating class differences through these communications. It's not illegal or unethical to share your vacation plans with your supervisee, but an ethical supervisor would be able to explain how they considered the 4 ethical principles: beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice, prioritizing their supervisee. What about situations where there might be a supervisor attending an event, a social event, outside of the workspace, right? A colleague's social event might be the highlight of a workplace calendar. Everyone at the office might be invited. What should a supervisor consider before attending a supervisee's social event? Well, let's consider the 4 ethical principles: beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice. Whose beneficence is prioritized when a supervisor attends a supervisee's event? Well, the supervisee's beneficence might be supported. The supervisee might be excited to share that special occasion with the supervisor. They might be honored that the supervisor took time to be there, for instance. The supervisor's beneficence also might be supported, since they will likely benefit from food, drink, and fun. Is there really a risk of harm attending a supervisee's social event? There's always risk of harm in these things. The supervisor and the supervisee will learn things about each other just by seeing how they interact in that non-workspace. This occasion might change the way they interpret each other back in the office. What if one or the other, or both, drink alcohol excessively and say things that they wouldn't feel comfortable saying in the office? These are risks. Some risks are always present, but they might be manageable. This is where autonomy comes into play. If the supervisee invited the supervisor, and therefore autonomously, right, they chose to want to have the supervisor there, right, the choice of the supervisee might seem apparent. But is the supervisor sure the supervisee actually wants them there? Or was the supervisor invited because everyone in the office was being invited and the supervisee didn't want the supervisor to feel excluded? Choice might not be so apparent. The supervisor, therefore, should be the one considering the risks and benefits and trying to honestly communicate concerns with their supervisee whenever possible. Justice and fairness should also be considered. If the supervisor has engaged in social activities with some supervisees but not others, that's problematic. A supervisor should be prepared to explain how a choice to attend or not attend a supervisee's social event is fair and just. All professional roles present ethical challenges that need to be carefully evaluated. The role of the supervisor has additional responsibilities due to the unique power imbalance with the supervisee. Using the 4 ethical principles of beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, and justice to evaluate ethical challenges can help the supervisor feel confident in any decision they make. For more information, resources, and training opportunities, check out my website.